So to me, meaningful outcomes are consumer and family determined. You know, we forget to include the voices of the people with disabilities in determining these outcomes way too often. I have a student who this year in her dissertation was working with middle school students and who were demonstrating challenging behavior. And what she did was she included the voices of the students in developing the behavior intervention plans. So she did FBAs and she figured out the function of what the behaviors were. And then she talked to the students and she said, and I understand that this wouldn't work with every student with whom we worked, but she talked to the students and she said, so does this seem right? Can you add any information to that? And then with the teachers, they came up with a menu of things that would be interventions that would be acceptable. And then she asked the students, okay, here are 3 choices. Which one do you want to do? So we were trying to find other papers that did a similar kind of thing, and there weren't any. But how simple is that? You know, why aren't we asking the consumers more? We have to make sure that we're including the people with disabilities as much as we can in determining what the outcomes are, and we need to talk about about what families want. I was talking with Deborah earlier this morning, and as Pat mentioned, I run a preschool program in Seattle called Project Data. And Project Data is a program for young children with autism where they come to school half day and participate in an inclusive preschool, and then the other half of the day they spend in receiving intensive extended instruction where we do pretty traditional discrete trial kinds of intervention for them. And we also have a family component. And we talk about the fact that families drive the agenda of that family component. We work on the things that families want to work on. And that we always joke that the first year of that program, we all said we spent more time in Sunday school than many of us had spent in Sunday school in a very long time, because parents wanted us, that's what they wanted to work on. They wanted to be able for their kids to attend Sunday school. And I remember one family telling me afterwards that it was the most meaningful thing that they had ever done in intervention, because now she and her husband were able to worship together while their son went to children's services, and how much impact that had on their family. And I think about, that's nowhere on our assessments. But because of that, to this day, 21 years later, that family still checks in with me to ask questions and tell me how their son's doing. And I think it was because we listened to them. It's their life, their outcomes. They're also culturally relevant. We need to remember that, what is important for my family may not be the same as is important for Deborah's family. And, you looking at Deborah and I, you might think that we are from the same culture, but to me, I think about culture in a micro way. So whether that culture is that you like to go to libraries and we like to go to basketball games, we need to think about what's important to the family and make sure that families, that we're addressing those. They're individual. That what's important, again, that they're meaningful to the consumer and to the person with a disability and their family. They're functional, and one of my pillar people, and who I actually never met, was a man named Lou Brown. And actually, that's not true. I did meet him one time and totally embarrassed myself, and I'll tell you that story too. But Lou Brown in the 1970s really introduced us to this idea of functional outcomes. And he said that if a behavior is functional, if an outcome is functional, it means that it's something that the person with a disability doesn't, if the person with the disability can't do it, someone has to do it for them. So if I can't dress myself, someone has to dress me. So of course people all of a sudden said functional skills are adaptive skills, or self-care skills. But if I can't entertain myself, then someone's going to have to watch me every minute. So recreational skills are functional. If I can't read, someone's going to have to interpret the environment for me. If I can't walk from my hotel across the street to here independently, someone's going to have to hold my hand and escort me everywhere. So functional skills are much broader. So this man named Lou Brown really introduced that to us. So I was at a conference with a colleague probably 15 years ago, and I saw that he was on the agenda, and so I said to my colleague, "Do you know him?" And he said, "Oh yeah, we're good friends." I said, "Oh my gosh, will you introduce me?" And I said, so then like a total fool, I said, "I thought he was dead." I said that, I think, in front of him. He's like, "No, I'm very alive." I was like, okay. Obviously, I hadn't had enough coffee. And then the last thing about these meaningful outcomes is that they need to be forward-facing. So, as a person who works with young children, we think about, well, this skill is great. He can do these wooden puzzles because he's 4, but what's he going to do at 14? So if I have a child who likes to play with puzzles, that's awesome. But I need to start thinking always about that transition from the wooden puzzles to the cardboard jigsaws, to the more jigsaws that have more than 10 pieces, to what's going to be meaningful for this person and forward-facing to help him or her be independent and functional as he or she gets older. So to me, you can't have meaningful outcomes if you're not thinking about inclusion. And I'm hoping that this is not on here. I have to look because I have no memory anymore. Okay. Oops. Okay. So I was in Oklahoma visiting, doing some work with a colleague there, and a parent said something to me that has really transformed how I think about inclusion, and I think about inclusion a lot. But she said, the reason I think inclusion is important is because there are no special education Walmarts. And I thought, you're right. That sums it up. Children, people with disabilities don't live in the special ed world once they leave school. They live in everyone's world. We all live in this world together. So we need to remember that inclusion is not the opposite of exclusion. It's not just a placement strategy. It's about belonging. It's about being able to participate. It's about having a group of friends. It's about being a member of a community. And it's also about where everyone is valued, engaged, and able to feel connected. It's not just about being there, because you can be not included and be in a group of people, because we've all had that experience, right? I say to my students, this is the beginning of the fall quarter. Every fall I get a new group of graduate students. And so the first day I say, so here, this is a great example. So you're all here. You don't know anyone, and think about the first person that came up to you and said, "Hi, my name is, nice to meet you." That was the beginning of your inclusive community. So that's what we need to think about. It's about how do we provide supports so that everyone can participate in a meaningful way. Now, it's important, though, to think about that inclusion is more than a policy statement, and that there has to be outcomes associated with inclusion. So this is work that my colleague Kat Peck and I did many years ago, but I like to think about it as a way to frame our discussion about inclusion. Because when we first started working on inclusion, we would hear stories from parents who would tell us, my child is 10 years old, and he's always been in a segregated classroom, and now he's in an inclusive classroom. And for the first time ever, he was invited to a birthday party. And the parents will tell you the story, and you can see the joy in their face, a little bit of terror because they're worried about the birthday party just a little bit, but the joy. And I think, okay, well, number of birthday parties that you're invited to, we probably can't use that as an indicator of outcomes. I'm not sure that our government's going to go for that, but it means something. And so we did a bunch of research, and we now think about these outcomes within these 3 domains. So the first thing we think about outcomes of inclusion is that we think about students being involved in a community of practice with their other peers, where they get to participate in valued routines, rituals, and activities. So, if there's a valued routine at the school, whether it's how you get your lunch, or the Monday meeting, or the monthly the monthly assembly with the principal. Do the students with disabilities get to participate in that, and do they participate fully? The second thing I like to think about is membership. Are the students members of the class? And we look for actual symbols of membership. Do they have a cubby if everyone else has a cubby? If everyone's wearing a school t-shirt, do they wear a school t-shirt? If everyone has a job, do they have a job? And those are really clear symbols of membership. The second domain that we like to think about is this idea of relationships. So I think about membership as how a person interacts with the whole, and I think about relationships as more one-on-one. So when I think about relationships, I think of the range of relationships that we can have within any community. So I think about peers, people we just hang out with, helpers, people who help you, like our nice tech people here who've been helping me this morning, helpees, people who receive help, and then I also think about people with whom I have conflicts. Now you notice I didn't say friends, because to me a friend is someone who you hang out with and who you help and who receive help from, and who sometimes you have conflicts with and you figure out how to figure that out. We look at, to me, in an inclusive setting, you have all of those range of relationships. So often we look at students in inclusive classrooms, students with disabilities in inclusive classrooms, and they're the ones receiving the help all the time. But we know that they can help so many times. And I think about one example I love to give was this little girl in our study who had Down syndrome, and I was observing her. She was 4 at the time, and we were at a child care setting, and I was kind of trying to blend into the wall, as observers often try to do, and we were out on the playground, and a little boy fell off a swing. And so, 4 years old, they all ran over to the kid, and he's crying, and the teacher's all there, except for the little girl with Down syndrome, who came over to me, and she was pointing. And I looked at what she was pointing at, and it was a bucket. So I picked her up, she put her hand in the bucket, and she pulled out the first aid kit, and she ran over to the teacher. And by this time, the boy was gone. He was fine. No need for the first aid kit, but she was on it. She was like, I can do this. I'm here to help. So, we don't think about that skill. She wanted to be a helper, and, what were we doing to help her achieve that goal? And then the final domain here is skills, because, it doesn't matter how many birthday parties you get invited to, if you're still not getting the appropriate instruction that you need in learning how to communicate, learning how to read, learning how to take care of yourself, all of those things. And to me, this is inclusion right there in that sweet spot where you're a member of a community, you have meaningful relationships with people, and you're learning the skills that you need to be independent in your life. And so one more indicator of meaningful relationships that I just love to show is that this is a note that 2 former students of the EEU wrote about our school, and I just think it's so lovely, because where they say we have learned that it does not matter if you are different. Differences are what make you special and human. Everyone is always supportive of each other, and you have someone to help you. And I just think that's what inclusion is. Those are meaningful outcomes. So to me, that's what we're working for, is to have children thinking about that, about their schooling. So how do we achieve those meaningful outcomes? Well, I'm going to talk to you about 4 non-negotiables. I think as I've gotten older, I feel like my list of non-negotiables have gotten, my list has gotten shorter, but I'm more stubborn about the fact I feel these things are non-negotiable. So the first is that positive reinforcement, got to have it. Number 2 is how to teach, making instruction intentional. Teaching students what to do is number 3, and then database decision making, because did your teaching work? So as I tell my students all the time, I don't care how elegant your lesson is. If the student you're working with can't do what you're trying to teach them, then it's not effective for that student at this moment in time. Maybe great with another student at another moment in time.